She's gone, Your Grace. The captain of the guard knelt, his armor clinking against the polished marble floor, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Alpha King David stared at the empty bedchamber, the lingering scent of jasmine and rain, the only proof Lisa had ever been there. Gone? David's voice was dangerously quiet, a storm gathering at the edge of the world. A human does not simply vanish from the heart of the Blackwood Citadel, Captain. There was no breach, no struggle. The captain stammered. Only this. He held out a small, roughly woven talisman, the kind forbidden within the palace walls. The scent of the sacred mountain clung to it. Pine, ancient stone, and ozone. David's heart fractured. She had sought the forbidden magic. She had left him. The air in Blackwood Citadel was thick, not with the usual smoke of the hearths, but with an oppressive silence. It had been nearly 12 moons since Lisa disappeared. The kingdom of Ethelgard, once vibrant under David's rule, felt the absence of its intended queen. More than the kingdom, David felt it. He stood by the arched window of his solar, gazing out at the jagged peaks of the sacred mountain. The mountain was a jagged scar against the sky, shrouded in perpetual mist and rumors of dark, ancient sorcery. It was forbidden territory, a place where wolves were said to lose their minds and humans their souls. And it was where she had gone. You stare at it as if willpower alone could bring her back, a dry voice observed. David didn't turn. Elias, his advisor and a wolf whose coat had gone silver before his time, stood in the doorway. Willpower is all I have left, Elias. And a kingdom that is fraying at the edges, Elias countered, stepping into the room. The southern packs are restless. They speak of weakness in the citadel. They speak of a king who pines for a human runaway. David finally turned. His eyes, usually a piercing gold, were dull. Let them speak. If they wish to challenge my strength, let them march to the gates. Elias sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. It is not just the packs, David. The blight, it spreads. Crops are failing in the eastern valleys. The healers are baffled by the sickness taking the young and the old alike. It is as if the land itself is dying. David rubbed his temples. The dull ache that had become his constant companion flared into a sharp pain. Send more grain to the east, double the patrols in the south. It is a temporary measure, Elias said softly. The people need their king, fully present, not a ghost haunting these halls. What would you have me do, Elias? David's voice rose, the wolf within him straining against the tight leash of his control. Forget her? Choose another? You know as well as I do that she was my mate. The bond. He trailed off, the word turning to ash in his mouth. The bond was a frayed thread, vibrating with an unsettling emptiness. I know, Elias said, his tone gentle. But you are also Alpha King. Your duty is to Ethelgard. David turned back to the window. The mountain seemed to mock him. Why, Lisa? He thought, for the 1,000th time. What did you hope to find there that I could not give you? He remembered her as she was the night before she vanished. They had stood on the balcony, the kingdom spread out below them. She had been unusually quiet, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the distant peaks. When he asked her what was wrong, she had merely smiled, a sad, fleeting thing, and touched his cheek. Nothing, my love. Just thinking about the future. The memory was a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the window frame until his knuckles turned white. He had thought her silence was contentment. He had been blind. Days bled into weeks. The situation in Ethelgard worsened. The blight spread, turning lush forests into withered husks. The sickness claimed more lives. And then, the true crisis struck. David was in the council chamber when the cough began. It was a deep, racking sound that tore at his chest. At first, he dismissed it as exhaustion, but within a week, he could barely stand. The healers flocked to his side, their faces grim. "It is the blight, Your Grace." The head healer, an old woman named Alara, whispered, her hands trembling as she mixed a bitter draught. "It has taken root within you." David lay in his bed, the same bed Lisa had vanished from, staring at the canopy. His strength, his speed, his very essence as an alpha were slowly draining away. He could feel the wolf within him whimpering, pacing frantically in the confines of his failing body. "How long?" he rasped. Alara bowed her head. "I do not know, my king. This is not an illness born of this world. It is something older, something darker." As the news of the king's illness spread, panic gripped the citadel. The southern pack, sensing weakness, began to mass their forces. The end seemed inevitable. Ethelgard was falling, and its king was dying. In the fevered dreams that plagued him, David saw the sacred mountain. He saw Lisa, her dark hair whipped by the wind, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She was reaching out to him, but she was always just beyond his grasp. He woke one night, drenched in sweat, a name on his lips. Lisa. Elias was there, a silent sentinel by his bed. "Rest, David." "She's coming," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can feel her." Elias looked at him with profound pity. "It is just the fever, Your Grace." But David knew better. The frayed thread of their bond, the bond that had been silent for a year, suddenly thrummed with a terrifying, vibrant energy. It was a chaotic, untamed pulse that spoke of ancient power and unimaginable distance. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the darkness. "Come back to me," he thought, sending the plea down the tenuous connection. "Come back before it's too late." And far away, on the slopes of the sacred mountain, a figure wrapped in a cloak of spun shadows paused, turning her face toward the distant citadel. The storm broke over the citadel with unprecedented fury. Lightning rent the sky, casting stark, jagged shadows across the courtyards, while thunder rattled the ancient stones. The guards on the walls huddled in their cloaks, eyes straining against the deluge. It was weather fit for demons, not men or wolves. At the main gate, a solitary figure emerged from the sheet of rain. "Halt!" roared the captain of the guard, struggling to be heard over the gale. He leveled his spear, the iron tip gleaming in the flashes of lightning. "State your business. No one enters Blackwood Citadel during a storm." The figure didn't stop. She moved with an eerie grace, seemingly unaffected by the wind that threatened to tear the men from the battlements. She reached the heavy oak doors, and before the guards could loose a warning arrow, the doors groaned open. They hadn't been unbarred. The captain rushed down to the courtyard, his men following close behind. They surrounded the intruder, weapons drawn. She stood perfectly still, rain cascading off a cloak that seemed to absorb the scant light. Slowly, she reached up and pulled back the hood. Gasps rippled through the ranks of guards. Weapons wavered. It was Lisa, but not the Lisa they remembered. The gentle human woman who had captured their king's heart was gone. This woman's eyes held a stormy, iridescent quality, swirling with colors not found in nature. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and her posture spoke of absolute, quiet command. She looked like a creature carved from the sacred mountain itself. "I need to see him," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the howling wind with unnatural clarity. "My lady?" the captain faltered, lowering his spear slightly. The king, he is gravely ill. None are permitted to see him. I am aware, Lisa replied, her tone brooking no argument. Take me to him. Now. The captain hesitated, torn between his orders and the undeniable authority radiating from the woman before him. The air around her crackled with a latent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Reluctantly, he signaled his men to stand down and led the way into the keep. The journey through the corridors was a silent one. Servants and guards alike froze as they saw her, whispering her name like an invocation. She ignored them, her focus entirely on the path ahead. They reached the doors to the king's bedchamber. Elias stood guard, his expression a mask of weary sorrow. When he saw Lisa, his eyes widened in shock. Lisa, he breathed, stepping forward. You returned. Elias, she acknowledged, a flicker of warmth breaking through her stoic facade. Let me pass. He is fading quickly, Elias warned, his voice thick with emotion. The healers have done all they can. It is only a matter of time. Then I am not too late, she said, pushing past him. The room smelled of sickness and despair. Ilara was wiping a damp cloth across David's brow. He looked terrible. His once strong frame was wasted, his skin drawn tight over his bones, a sickly grayish pallor replacing his healthy tan. His breath came in shallow, rattling gasps. Lisa stopped at the foot of the bed, her heart clenching painfully at the sight of him. This was the man she loved, the king she had left behind. Guilt, sharp and biting, warred with the purpose that had driven her for the past year. Who goes there? Ilara quavered, turning from the bed. Leave us, Lisa commanded softly. Ilara squinted, then gasped. My lady. But the contagion, leave us, Lisa repeated, the air in the room suddenly growing heavy. The healer, feeling the immense pressure, bowed hastily and scurried out, closing the door behind her. Lisa approached the bed. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and brushed a lock of hair from David's face. He was burning up. At her touch, David's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were glassy, unfocused. Then, they locked onto hers. A profound shock washed over his features, quickly followed by a desperate yearning. Lisa, he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. Is it a dream? No, David, she murmured, leaning closer. I am here. He tried to reach for her, but his hand fell back onto the sheets, too weak to lift. You left, he said, the hurt evident even in his weakened state. Why did you leave? To save you, she replied, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. To save Ethelgard. He closed his eyes, a grimace of pain twisting his features. The blight. It has me. You should not be here. It will take you too. It will not, Lisa stated with absolute certainty. She reached into her cloak and drew out a small, intricately carved wooden box. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency. I did not spend a year on the mountain learning old songs, David. I learned the truth. She opened the box. Inside nestled a single glowing silver root. It pulsed with a rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. The mountain is not evil, Lisa explained, carefully lifting the root. It is old. It holds the ancient magic that once sustained this land. The blight is not an illness, David. It is a curse. A curse placed upon Ethelgard centuries ago, dormant until now. David watched her, fascinated despite his pain. A curse? By whom? That matters less than how to break it, she said. The magic I learned, it requires a conduit, a willing vessel to channel the mountain's power to cleanse the land. She brought the glowing root to his lips. Eat this. David hesitated. The root looked otherworldly, dangerous. But looking into Lisa's eyes, he saw only resolute love and determination. He trusted her more than he trusted his own failing body. Slowly, he opened his mouth. The moment the root touched his tongue, it dissolved into pure, liquid light. The light surged down his throat, spreading rapidly through his chest. It felt like swallowing a star. David gasped, his body arching off the bed as the ancient magic collided with the dark curse within him. The pain was excruciating, blinding, a battleground of light and shadow tearing through his veins. Lisa placed her hands firmly on his chest, closing her eyes. She began to chant, the words ancient and guttural, resonating with the very stones of the citadel. The air in the room grew thick, the temperature dropping rapidly as she drew the sickness out of him, funneling the power of the mountain to fight the encroaching darkness. The battle raged within him, a silent, agonizing struggle. And then, slowly, the oppressive darkness began to recede. The rattling in his chest eased. The fever broke, a cool, refreshing wave washing over his skin. He slumped back onto the pillows, exhausted but entirely free of pain. The grayish pallor was already fading, replaced by the faint flush of returning health. Lisa collapsed into a chair beside the bed, her face pale, the iridescent glow in her eyes dimmed. The exertion had taken a massive toll on her. David reached out, his hand finding hers. His grip was weak, but steady. "You did it," he whispered in awe. She managed a tired smile. "I saved my king, but the kingdom, that is the next step." The king's miraculous recovery sent shockwaves through the citadel. The morning after Lisa's return, David stood on the balcony, his strength returning rapidly, thanks to the residual magic humming in his blood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, clean dawn. Elias stood beside him, his face a picture of disbelief and cautious hope. "The healers say they have never seen anything like it, Your Grace. The dark taint in your blood is completely gone." "It was Lisa," David said, his gaze fixed on the courtyard below, where guards were training with renewed vigor. "She wields a power I do not understand." "It is forbidden magic, David," Elias warned softly. "The Pax will not easily accept a queen who practices the arts of the sacred mountain. They fear it. They fear what they do not understand," David countered sharply. "She saved my life, and she claims she can save the land." He turned back to his chambers, where Lisa was resting. When he entered, she was awake, sitting by the fire. The magical exhaustion was still evident in her posture, but her eyes were alert. "We need to talk," David said, pulling up a chair opposite her. "The curse, the blight. How do we stop it from consuming Ethelgard?" Lisa looked at the flickering flames. "The root I gave you cured the immediate infection, but the source of the curse remains. It is anchored deep within the earth, beneath the citadel itself." "Beneath the citadel?" David frowned. "The catacombs have been sealed for generations, because your ancestors knew what lay beneath," Lisa replied, finally looking at him. "The curse was woven into the foundations of this place by the first Alpha King's enemies. It was designed to slowly drain the life from the land, culminating in the death of the ruling Alpha." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "And you learned how to break it on the mountain." "I learned that it requires a tremendous release of pure energy to shatter the anchor," she explained. "Energy that only the mountain can provide. But I cannot wield that much power alone. The conduit. She hesitated, her eyes meeting his. Must be the Alpha King. David absorbed this. You need me to channel this magic with you. Yes, she said softly. But it is dangerous, David. The power is raw, untamed. If we lose control, it could destroy the citadel along with the curse. If we do nothing, the kingdom dies anyway. David pointed out. When do we begin? Tonight, Lisa said, rising. Under the light of the full moon. The magic is strongest then. The day was a blur of preparation. David briefed his council, omitting the full details of the magic involved, focusing only on the plan to confront the source of the blight in the catacombs. There were murmurs of dissent, particularly from the representatives of the southern packs, who viewed Lisa's return and David's sudden recovery with deep suspicion. We do not trust this magic, Your Grace. Lord Vane of the Ironwood Pack sneered. It smells of witchcraft. It smells of survival, Lord Vane. David retorted, his tone icy, a hint of his returning alpha aura pressing down on the room. Unless you have a better solution to save your failing crops? Vane grumbled, but fell silent. As night fell, the moon rose full and bright, casting a silver sheen over the citadel. David and Lisa descended into the ancient depths of the keep. The air in the catacombs was stale and heavy, filled with the dust of centuries. Torchlight flickered against the rough-hewn stone walls, casting long, monstrous shadows. Lisa led the way, navigating the labyrinthine passages with a certainty that unnerved David. It was as if she could hear the stone whispering to her. They reached a massive iron door, rusted shut. Behind this, Lisa said, tracing a complex symbol carved into the stone lintel. The anchor. David stepped forward, placing his hands flat against the iron. He pushed, his muscles straining, but the door refused to yield. Allow me, Lisa said. She placed a hand over his. The iridescent light returned to her eyes, and she murmured a single word. The heavy iron door groaned in protest, then slowly, agonizingly, swung inward on hinges that hadn't moved in a millennium. A wave of palpable darkness washed over them. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical force, cold and malevolent, smelling of decay and old blood. They stepped into a cavernous chamber. In the center, suspended in the air, was a jagged obsidian crystal. It pulsed with a sickening purple light, a malignant heart beating beneath the citadel. Black tendrils of energy snaked outward from it, burying themselves deep into the cavern walls, spreading the blight like venom through the earth. The anchor, Lisa breathed, her voice tight. How do we destroy it? David asked, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword, though he knew steel would be useless here. We don't, Lisa said, turning to him, a sudden, terrifying resolve in her eyes. We absorb it. Absorb it? David stepped back. Are you mad? That thing is pure poison. It is corrupted energy, Lisa corrected. If we channel the mountain's power through us, we can purify it, turning it back into life force for the land. But we must do it together. Our bond. She paused, taking a shaky breath. It must be whole. David understood. The bond between them had been fractured by her departure, by his feelings of betrayal. To survive channeling this immense power, they needed absolute unity. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. He looked deep into her eyes, seeing past the magic, past the strange woman she had become, to the Lisa he had loved, the woman who had sacrificed everything, even his trust, to save him. I forgive you, he said softly, the words sealing the crack in their foundation. He felt the immediate shift. The frayed thread of their bond snapped back into place, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. He could feel her heartbeat, her fear, her immense courage echoing in his own chest. "Together," Lisa whispered. She took his hand. With her other hand, she reached into her cloak, pulling out a handful of the glowing silver roots. She crushed them in her palm, the light flaring brilliantly, illuminating the dark cavern. She began to chant, the ancient language resonating with power. David felt the surge of magic entering him through their clasped hands. It was terrifying, a rushing river of raw energy threatening to sweep him away. He grounded himself, focusing entirely on Lisa, anchoring himself to her presence. The magic hit the obsidian crystal. The cavern erupted in a blinding flash of colliding energies. The purple light flared violently, fighting the purifying silver magic. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched scream of tearing reality. David felt the corruption trying to claw its way up his arm, cold and biting. He roared, pushing his own alpha strength, his sheer will to protect his mate and his kingdom, into the magic. Lisa screamed as the power threatened to overload her. Her body arched backward, the iridescent light radiating from her skin. "Hold on." David projected through their bond, pouring every ounce of his strength into her. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. Then, with a concussive boom that sent them both flying backward, the obsidian crystal shattered. The shockwave knocked the breath from David's lungs. He hit the stone floor hard, momentarily stunned. The cavern was silent, the oppressive darkness entirely gone. He scrambled up, frantically searching the gloom. "Lisa?" She was lying near the center of the room, unmoving. David rushed to her side, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fell to his knees, gathering her limp body in his arms. Her skin was terrifyingly cold. The iridescent light in her eyes was extinguished. "Lisa, please," he begged, shaking her gently. "Please don't leave me again." He pressed his ear to her chest. A faint, slow heartbeat fluttered against his cheek. She was alive, but barely. The magic had nearly consumed her. He picked her up, ignoring his own aching body, and began the long ascent out of the catacombs. He carried her through the silent halls of the citadel, ignoring the startled gasps of the night watch, straight to his chambers. He laid her on the bed, summoning Alara with a roar that shook the very stones of the keep. The head healer arrived moments later, breathless and terrified. "Do whatever it takes," David commanded, his voice raw with fear. "Save her." Alara rushed to the bedside, her hands hovering over Lisa. She performed her checks, her brow furrowing. "Her life force. It is incredibly weak, Your Grace. It is as if a great fire has burned itself out within her." "The magic," David said, pacing frantically. "She channeled too much. I do not know how to treat this," Alara admitted, her voice trembling. "Potions and poultices cannot mend a drained soul." David stopped pacing, staring at Lisa's pale face. He had failed her. She had saved his life, saved his kingdom, and he had let the power destroy her. Then he remembered. The bond. When they had channeled the magic, he had felt her strength flowing into him, sustaining him. Could it work in reverse? He ordered Alara out of the room. The healer protested weakly, but the look in the Alpha King's eyes silenced her. David sat on the edge of the bed and took Lisa's cold hand in his. He closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself, finding the vibrant, newly restored well of his own alpha strength. He visualized the bond between them, a glowing golden thread connecting their hearts. He began to push his energy down the thread, Take it, he silently commanded. Take my strength. Live. It was a slow, agonizing process. He felt his own vitality draining, a profound weariness settling over his limbs. But he didn't stop. He pushed harder, pouring his love, his guilt, his determination into the connection. Hours passed. The sky outside began to lighten, the first rays of dawn creeping through the window. David was slouched over, exhausted, his grip on her hand slackening. He was running empty. A slight pressure against his fingers made him snap his eyes open. Lisa's hand was faintly warm. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. The stormy iridescence was gone, replaced by the warm, familiar brown of the woman he loved. She looked at him, a weak, tired smile touching her lips. "You look terrible," she whispered. David let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a year. He leaned down, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of jasmine and rain. "Never do that again," he choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Never. I don't think I have to," she murmured, her hand coming up to rest on his head. "It's gone, David. The curse is broken." The morning sun crested the jagged teeth of the sacred mountain, spilling a golden, pristine light across Ethelgard. David stood on the balcony of his chambers, breathing in air that felt entirely new. For a year, the wind had carried the metallic, sour stench of decay. Today, it carried the scent of damp earth, blooming pine, and the undeniable, vibrant hum of life. Below him, the citadel was waking up. Guards who had dragged their feet for months were marching with a crisp, rhythmic cadence. In the lower courtyards, servants were pulling back the heavy, dark tapestries that had shrouded the windows, letting the sunlight scrub the ancient stones clean. David turned back to the room. Lisa lay asleep, her chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The color had returned to her cheeks, entirely erasing the ghostly, ethereal pallor she had borne since walking out of the storm. She looked like his Lisa again, though he could still feel the faint, unfamiliar thrum of ancient magic resting deep within her marrow. He had poured half of his alpha strength into her through their bond the night before, and the lingering fatigue in his muscles was a small price to pay for the warmth of her hand. A sharp, demanding knock on the heavy oak door shattered the quiet intimacy of the morning. "Your Grace." Elias's voice was muted, but urgent. David pulled the heavy velvet curtains around Lisa's bed to afford her privacy, then crossed the room and cracked the door. "What is it, Elias?" David kept his voice low. "Forgive the intrusion, David," the silver-haired advisor said, his brow furrowed with deep lines of stress. "But the council chamber is in an uproar. Lord Vane and the Southern Alphas have blockaded the main hall. They are demanding an immediate audience." David felt a familiar, cold irritation spike in his chest. "The curse is broken, Elias. Can they not feel the change in the air? The land is healing, then they feel it," Elias replied, his tone grave. "But they attribute it to dark sorcery. They say the shock wave that emanated from the catacombs last night shook the very foundations of the keep. Vane is claiming that the human woman has bewitched you, that she has traded one curse for another to secure her place on the throne." David's jaw tightened. He stepped out into the corridor, pulling the door softly shut behind him. The protective instincts of the wolf flared violently within him. "Vane tests my patience. He forgets who wears the crown. He remembers perfectly well," Elias cautioned as they walked swiftly down the stone corridors. "He lost a son to the blight, David. Grief makes men irrational, and fear makes them dangerous. He sees a human who vanished to the Forbidden Mountain and returned wielding untamed power. To the traditional packs, that is not a savior. That is a threat. They reached the heavy double doors of the council chamber. Two of Vane's men, broad-shouldered brutes from the Ironwood pack, stood guard. When David approached, they hesitated, their eyes dropping beneath his piercing golden stare. But they did not immediately step aside. A low, menacing growl rumbled in David's chest. It was not a human sound. It was the primal, undisputed command of the Alpha King. The guards blanched, practically scrambling over each other to haul the heavy doors open. David strode into the room. The long oak table was surrounded by the alphas of Ethelgard's most powerful packs. The noise in the room, a cacophony of shouting and accusations, died instantly the moment his boots hit the floor. At the far end of the table stood Lord Vane, his scarred face twisted in a mixture of defiance and genuine fear. "My Lord King," Vane began, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "We demand answers. What sorcery was unleashed beneath our feet last night?" "The sorcery that saved your life, Vane," David said, walking slowly to the head of the table. He did not sit. He leaned his hands on the polished wood, projecting sheer dominance. "The anchor of the blight has been destroyed. The sickness is gone. By the hand of a witch." Vane spat, stepping forward. "We have laws, David. The magic of the sacred mountain is forbidden. It corrupts the mind and poisons the soul. She vanished a human and returned a monster, and you have let her infect the heart of the citadel. Choose your next words with extreme care, Vane," David warned, his eyes flashing a dangerous, luminous gold. "You speak of your queen. She is no queen of mine." Vane roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "A true queen is bound to the pack, not to the shadows of the mountain. How do we know she hasn't cursed us all to a slower, darker death? Because you are standing here, Yehoster, breathing clean air, instead of choking on your own blood." A clear, unwavering voice rang out from the doorway. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Lisa stood there. She had dressed in a simple, practical gown of dark blue, her hair pulled back, but she leaned heavily against the stone doorframe. She looked frail, yet an undeniable aura of authority surrounded her. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing perfectly still as she slowly made her way to David's side. "You want proof that I am not a monster, Lord Vane?" Lisa asked, her brown eyes meeting the massive alpha's gaze without a flinch. "You want proof that my magic is for Ethelgard?" Vane crossed his arms, sneering. "Words are wind, human. We require a demonstration of your loyalty to the laws of the wolf." David moved to intercept, to shut this down. But Lisa placed a gentle hand on his arm, silently asking him to wait. "Name your proof, Lord Vane," Lisa said softly, her voice carrying a profound, quiet weight. "I accept." The ancient fighting pit of Blackwood Citadel lay carved into the bedrock beneath the eastern towers. It was a brutal, circular amphitheater of dark stone, stained with the history of 1,000 dominance battles. Torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows over the faces of the gathered alphas. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of pine, wet stone, and the sharp, metallic tang of wolfish anticipation. David stood on the raised dais reserved for the king, his hands gripping the iron railing so tightly the metal groaned. Every instinct screamed at him to leap down into the sand, to tear Lord Vane apart for invoking this ancient, barbaric law. But he was trapped by the very traditions that held his kingdom together. Vane had invoked the right of the unseen, a trial designed to test the purity of one's spirit against the primal nature of the wolf. Down in the pit, Lisa stood completely alone. She wore a simple tunic and trousers, her feet bare against the cold sand. She looked devastatingly small in the vast arena. Yet her posture was straight, her chin held high. "The rules are ancient and absolute," Lord Vane announced, his booming voice echoing off the stone tiers. "The accused claims her magic is of the earth, meant to heal and not to harm. Let her prove it. She will face the blight touched." A heavy iron portcullis on the far side of the arena began to rise with the grinding shriek of rusted chains. David's heart stopped. From the darkness of the holding pen emerged a nightmare. It was a massive timber wolf, easily twice the size of a normal beast. But its fur was matted and falling out in sickly gray patches. Its eyes were milky white with madness, and thick black veins pulsed beneath its skin. It was an animal completely consumed by the remnants of the blight, driven utterly feral by pain and corruption. "Vane, this is madness," David roared, stepping forward. "That beast cannot be reasoned with. It will tear her apart. If her magic is pure, she will survive." Vane countered coldly, not looking away from the pit. "If she is a creature of darkness, the beast will recognize its own." The blight-touched wolf let out a horrific, gurgling snarl, saliva dripping from its massive jaws. It fixed its milky eyes on Lisa, its body dropping into a predatory crouch. In the pit, Lisa did not move. She didn't summon the storm-like iridescent power she had used in the catacombs. Instead, she took a deep, centering breath, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second. When she opened them, she slowly raised her hands, palms facing outward, empty and entirely defenseless. The feral wolf charged. It crossed the sand with terrifying speed, a blur of muscle and madness. The gathered alphas gasped. David vaulted over the iron railing, ignoring the laws, intent only on reaching her before the beast did. But he was too slow. The wolf leapt, jaws snapping toward Lisa's throat. Instead of flinching, Lisa stepped into the attack. As the beast's chest collided with her, she didn't strike it. She threw her arms around its massive, corrupted neck, burying her face into its matted fur. The sheer force of the impact drove her backward, sending them both crashing to the sand in a tangle of limbs. A collective gasp echoed through the amphitheater. David hit the sand, sprinting toward them, his heart tearing in his chest. "Stop!" Lisa's voice rang out, sharp and breathless. David skidded to a halt, a mere 10 paces away. The scene before him defied logic. The massive wolf had Lisa pinned, its jaws inches from her face. But it wasn't biting. Lisa's hands were glowing, not with the violent, chaotic purple energy of the anchor, but with a soft, pulsing, liquid, silver light. The light was bleeding from her palms, directly into the thick, black veins of the beast. "It's just pain," Lisa whispered, her voice incredibly gentle, speaking to the monster as if it were a frightened pup. "I know. The darkness hurts. Let it go." The feral wolf whimpered. The horrific snarling stopped. Before the stunned eyes of the entire council, the black veins pulsing beneath the animal's skin began to recede, chased away by the encroaching silver light. The milky whiteness in its eyes dissolved, revealing a clear, vibrant amber. The beast stopped fighting. It collapsed entirely, resting its massive head heavily on Lisa's chest, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of utter relief. The madness was gone. Silence reigned in the pit, profound and absolute. Lisa gently pushed the heavy wolf off her and sat up, wiping a smear of dirt from her cheek. The wolf immediately scrambled to its feet, nudged her shoulder with a wet nose, and then turned, trotting peacefully back into the shadows of its holding pen. Lisa stood, dusting off her knees, and looked up at the tiers of silent men. Her gaze finally locked onto Lord Vane. "My magic does not destroy, Lord Vane," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It remembers. It remembers how the land used to be, before the corruption, and it will not harm anything that belongs to Ethelgard." Vane stared at her, his mouth slightly open, the defiance entirely drained from his face. He looked at the empty holding pen, then back at the human woman standing in the center of the fighting pit. Slowly, deliberately, the massive alpha dropped to one knee, bowing his head in submission. A moment later, the other alphas followed suit. David walked forward, his chest heaving with adrenaline and overwhelming pride. He reached Lisa, pulling her into a fierce, desperate embrace, burying his face in her hair. "You are reckless," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "I am logical," she corrected softly, wrapping her arms around his waist. The beast wasn't evil. It was sick. And now, they understand. David pulled back, looking into her warm brown eyes, finally seeing the true depth of the queen she had become. The kingdom was united. The curse was broken. But as they walked out of the pit, hand in hand, the distant, frantic blare of a warning horn echoed down from the northern watchtowers, shattering the brief peace. The victory feast intended to celebrate the healing of the land never took place. Instead, the great hall of Blackwood Citadel was transformed into a chaotic war room. Heavy oak tables were pushed together, draped with sprawling, tattered maps of the northern territories. The air, which had briefly smelled of hope, was now thick with the scent of burning wax, sweat, and acute anxiety. "The Crimson Fangs," Elias said, his voice grim as he pointed a weathered finger at a jagged mountain pass on the map. "They have crossed the frozen wash. Our scouts report thousands of them, moving with terrifying speed." David leaned over the map, the muscles in his back tense, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. The Crimson Fangs were not a pack. They were a horde. Exiled generations ago for practicing blood magic and cannibalism, they had survived in the harsh, frozen wastelands of the deep north. They were brutal, relentless, and completely devoid of honor. "How?" David demanded, his golden eyes scanning the terrain. "The ward of the ancients spans the entire northern border. It has kept them out for 300 years. No army can march through that magic." Lord Vane, standing respectfully opposite the king, a stark contrast to his earlier rebellion, cleared his throat. "The scouts report that the ward is gone, Your Grace. The pillars of stone are shattered. The magic has evaporated." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table. David slowly lifted his head, his gaze meeting Lisa's across the room. She was sitting quietly by the hearth, a cup of untouched tea in her hands, listening intently. Understanding dawned on David, cold and sharp. "The shockwave," he whispered. Lisa stood, setting the cup down, and walked toward the table. The alphas parted for her instinctively, a newfound respect marking their movements. "While when we shattered the anchor beneath the citadel," Lisa explained, her voice steady but laced with deep regret, "we released a massive surge of purified energy. It cascaded through the earth, cleansing the blight. But magic of that magnitude is a blunt instrument. It seems the shockwave disrupted the ancient frequencies of the northern ward. We traded a slow death for a fast one," Vane muttered, though there was no accusation in his tone, only grim reality. "The Fangs have been waiting for a crack in our defenses for centuries. They know the kingdom is weakened from the blight. They will not stop until they reach the citadel. Then we stop them at the pass," David declared, his alpha command snapping the room back to attention. We do not let them spill into the valleys. Vane, marshal the southern heavy infantry. Elias, send riders to the eastern packs. Tell them to abandon the harvest and march immediately. We meet the horde at the throat of the frozen wash. The alphas hammered their fists against their chests in a unified salute and hurried from the room, shouting orders to their captains. Within minutes, the great hall was empty, leaving only David and Lisa amidst the scattered maps. David turned away from the table, running a hand through his hair, the crushing weight of the crown settling heavily back onto his shoulders. He felt a gentle hand on his back. "You are exhausted," Lisa said softly. "You gave me half your strength last night. You are not ready for a war." "I am the king, Lisa," David replied, turning to pull her into his arms. He rested his chin on her head, seeking comfort in her presence. "Ready or not, my place is at the front lines. I will not let those monsters ravage the land we just saved." He pulled back slightly, looking down into her eyes. "You must stay here. The citadel is the most fortified structure in the kingdom. You will be safe." Lisa stepped out of his embrace, a stubborn fire igniting in her eyes. "I am not staying behind, David." "Lisa, be reasonable. This is not a feral beast in a fighting pit. This is an army of blood-crazed savages. Your magic drained you. You cannot fight a war." "I don't intend to fight it with a sword," she countered, walking back to the map. She tapped the jagged rendering of the northern mountain pass. The Ward of the Ancients wasn't just a spell. It was a resonance, a song of the earth, woven into the stone pillars by the first alphas. David frowned, stepping up beside her. "What are you saying?" "I spent a year on the sacred mountain learning the old songs, David," she said, looking up at him with absolute conviction. "The magic I used to heal you, to shatter the anchor. It is the same root magic that built the ward. If I can reach the central pillar at the frozen wash, I can reweave the frequency. I can rebuild the wall." David stared at her, his mind racing. If she could rebuild the ward, they wouldn't have to fight the horde. They could trap them on the other side of the mountains. But the risk was astronomical. The central pillar is miles from here, right in the path of the advancing army, David argued, his protective instincts fighting his strategic logic. "If you fail, if they reach you before you finish, if I don't go, thousands of your people will die in a brutal war." Lisa interrupted, stepping close to him, her hands resting flat against his armored chest. "We are bound, David. We saved the land together. We have to defend it together." He looked at the fierce, unwavering determination in her face. The human woman who used to hide behind his cloak was gone forever, replaced by a queen who understood the true cost of ruling. David let out a long, heavy sigh, reaching up to cover her hands with his own. "You will not leave my side. You will be surrounded by my personal guard at all times. And if the lines break, you run. Promise me." Lisa smiled, a small, brave thing that made his heart ache. "I promise." "Then prepare yourself," David said, his eyes hardening as he looked toward the northern windows. "We ride at dusk." The march north was a brutal testament to the sudden desperation of Ethelgard. David drove the army hard, pushing horses and wolves to their absolute limits through the biting chill of the highlands. The air grew thinner, carrying the distinct, metallic scent of snow and faintly the underlying rot that always accompanied the crimson fangs. Lisa rode beside David, wrapped in a heavy, fur-lined cloak. Her face was pale, drawn tight by the lingering exhaustion of the magic she had wielded. But her posture remained stubbornly upright. She spent the journey in silence, Her eyes often closed, her fingers moving in subtle, rhythmic patterns as if she were mentally tracing the ancient songs she intended to weave. They reached the ridge overlooking the frozen wash, just as the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks, painting the snow-covered valley in the bloody hues of twilight. David pulled his massive black destrier to a halt, raising a gauntleted hand to signal the army. Below them, the pass narrowed into a natural bottleneck before opening onto the fertile plains of Ethelgard, and pouring through that bottleneck like a festering wound was the horde. There were thousands of them. They moved not with military discipline, but with a terrifying, chaotic frenzy. Torches dotted their ranks like angry fireflies, illuminating crude armor made of bone and rusted iron. The sound of their advance was a continuous, dull roar of chanting and clashing metal that set David's teeth on edge. "They are faster than we anticipated," Elias muttered, bringing his horse alongside the king's. The Silver Wolf's face was grim. "They will breach the throat of the pass within the hour." David's gaze tracked the horde's progress, then shifted to the valley floor just ahead of the bottleneck. Standing amidst the snow and scree were the shattered remains of the central pillar, a massive obelisk of dark stone, now fractured into a dozen massive, jagged shards. "That is where you need to be," David said, not looking at Lisa, but addressing her directly. "The central pillar." "Yes," Lisa confirmed, her voice steady despite the terrifying vista before them. "I need to touch the largest fragment to anchor the resonance." "It's too far forward," Lord Vane rumbled, riding up on David's other side. He looked at the advancing horde, then at Lisa. "The moment we descend into the valley, they will see us. We cannot hold them off long enough for her to work whatever magic she intends." "We don't have to hold the entire valley," David stated, his tactical mind slotting the pieces into place. "We only have to hold the throat of the pass." He turned in his saddle, addressing his commanders. "Vane, take the heavy infantry down the right flank. Shield wall formation. Elias, take the archers to the left ridge. Rain fire on their vanguard. We must create a choke point at the narrows. I will lead the cavalry straight down the center to clear a path to the pillar." He looked at Lisa, his golden eyes filled with a terrifying mix of love and lethal intent. "You will ride with me. Once you are at the pillar, you do not stop chanting. You do not look up. You weave the ward, or we all die in this snow." Lisa nodded, pulling her hood up. "I am ready." "Sound the horns," David commanded. The low, mournful blast of the war horns shattered the twilight. The army of Ethelgard surged forward, a tidal wave of steel and fur pouring down the ridge toward the frozen wash. The clash was instantaneous and brutal. David, at the head of the heavy cavalry, drove into the vanguard of the Crimson Fangs like a battering ram. He fought with the desperate fury of an alpha protecting his territory, his sword a blur of lethal silver in the dimming light. Blood sprayed across the pristine snow, the stench of it overpowering the cold air. He carved a path through the chaos, pushing his horse relentlessly toward the shattered obelisk. Lisa rode tight to his flank, completely surrounded by his elite guard. She kept her head down, trusting David entirely to keep the violence at bay. "Hold the line." Vane's roar echoed over the din of battle from the right flank, his shield wall absorbing the tremendous impact of the horde's charge. They reached the broken pillar. The largest shard, easily the size of a small house, jutted from the earth like a broken tooth. "Dismount," David roared, hauling Lisa off her horse before it had even fully stopped. "Go." Lisa scrambled toward the massive shard, slipping slightly on the blood-slicked snow. She threw her gloves aside, pressing her bare palms against the freezing, rough-hewn stone. She closed her eyes, shutting out the screams, the clash of steel, the terrifying proximity of the enemy. She took a deep breath, reaching deep into her core, finding the quiet hum of the mountain's magic that had settled into her bones. She began to sing. It wasn't a song of words, but of profound, resonant tones. It was low at first, a vibration that seemed to originate from the earth itself. The stone beneath her hands began to thrum in response. David formed a protective ring around her with his guard, his sword dripping, his breath pluming in the freezing air. The Crimson Fangs, realizing what was happening, shifted their focus. The horde surged toward the pillar, a desperate, howling mass of bodies trying to break through the king's defense. "Hold them," David commanded, parrying a vicious blow from a massive Fang warrior and driving his blade into the man's chest. "Do not let them near her." The battle intensified. The air was thick with arrows from Elias's archers, raining down on the approaching horde, but there were simply too many of them. The Fangs threw themselves against the defensive ring with zero regard for their own lives. Driven mad by the scent of the king's blood and the irritating hum of the magic beginning to build in the air, David fought like a demon, his alpha strength fully unleashed. But he could feel the line faltering. His men were exhausted, outnumbered 10-1. He took a shallow cut to his shoulder, the pain flaring white-hot. But he ignored it, stepping into the breach to protect Lisa's blind side. Behind him, the song grew louder. It was no longer just a vibration. It was a clear, ringing note that vibrated in the teeth of every wolf on the battlefield. Lisa poured everything she had into the stone. The silver light flared in her palms, bleeding into the ancient cracks of the obelisk. She felt the resonance catch, connecting with the other shattered fragments scattered across the valley. The magic was waking up, but it was heavy, resisting her desperate pull. "Faster," she told herself, the cold seeping into her very marrow. "Please, faster." A massive Fang warrior, easily the size of a bear, broke through the line. He wielded a crude, two-handed axe, his eyes fixed on Lisa's glowing form. David turned, reacting on pure instinct. He threw himself between the warrior and Lisa, bringing his sword up in a desperate block. The impact of the axe against the steel was tremendous. The force drove David to his knees, his sword arm buckling. The warrior raised the axe for a killing blow. Lisa didn't stop singing. She didn't open her eyes, but she pushed the resonance outward, projecting the sheer, immovable force of the mountain into the air around them. A sudden, concussive wave of solid silver energy blasted from the central pillar. It slammed into the Fang warrior, throwing him backward with bone-crushing force. The wave rolled outward, a visible ripple of pure magic rushing across the valley floor. Wherever the silver wave touched the shattered remnants of the ward, the stone ignited with brilliant, blinding light. The pillars didn't physically rebuild, but the spaces between them suddenly solidified, forming a towering, translucent wall of shimmering energy that stretched across the entire throat of the frozen wash. The vanguard of the Crimson Fangs hit the newly formed wall and were violently repelled, thrown back into their own ranks with devastating force. The howling of the horde abruptly ceased, replaced by cries of confusion and terror. They were trapped on the northern side of the pass, the way completely barred. David remained on his knees, gasping for breath, staring at the shimmering wall of light. It was majestic. It was terrifying. It was absolute. Behind him, the ancient song ended. The blinding light in the pillar faded to a dull, steady pulse. David turned slowly. Lisa was slumped against the stone, her hands resting limply in her lap. Her eyes were closed, her face completely devoid of color. The effort had drained her completely. He crawled toward her, ignoring the burning pain in his shoulder, and pulled her into his arms. She was cold, so cold. But as he pressed 2 fingers to her throat, he felt a weak, steady pulse. "It's done," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The ward is sealed. You did it," David choked out, resting his forehead against hers. "You saved us all." The return to Blackwood Citadel was a solemn, triumphant procession. The army of Ethelgard marched not with the frantic pace of desperation, but with the measured tread of absolute victory. The Crimson Fangs were trapped behind an impenetrable wall of magic. The blight was gone, and the land was healing. Lisa rode in a litter, still recovering from the immense toll of weaving the ward. David rarely left her side, his protective instincts on high alert, even within the safety of their own borders. When they finally rode through the gates of the citadel, the reception was overwhelming. The courtyards were packed with citizens, not whispering in fear, but cheering in raucous celebration. Flowers were thrown from the battlements, landing softly on the cobblestones. As they entered the great hall, Lord Vane, the man who had demanded her death just days prior, stepped forward. He did not sneer, nor did he puff out his chest. He dropped to one knee, lowering his head in a gesture of profound respect. "We doubted you, my lady," Vane said, his booming voice carrying across the silent hall. "We called you a monster because we feared what we could not understand. You have proven that the true monsters reside outside our borders, and that you are the shield that guards us." He looked up, meeting Lisa's tired but warm eyes. "Long live the Queen." The cry was taken up by Elias, then by the other alphas, and finally by the entire hall, a thunderous roar that shook the very foundations of the keep. "Long live the Queen! Long live the King!" Lisa looked at David, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. The tension that had defined their relationship since her return finally broke. They had fought the darkness, both within and without, and they had survived. Later that evening, the citadel was quiet, the celebrations moving down into the lower city. David stood on the balcony of their chambers, watching the stars pinpoint the clear, uncorrupted sky. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, a clean, sharp scent that he had nearly forgotten. He felt a soft warmth press against his back. Lisa slipped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "You should be resting," David murmured, covering her hands with his own. "I am resting," she replied softly. "This is exactly where I want to be." David turned, pulling her into a gentle embrace. He looked down at her, the woman who had defied him, left him, and ultimately saved him. "I never asked you," he said, his voice quiet. "When you were on the mountain, learning the old songs, did you ever think about staying? Did you ever think about not coming back?" Lisa looked up at him, her brown eyes completely clear. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "The magic is powerful, David. But it is cold. It is ancient and lonely. I went there to find a weapon to save the man I love. The mountain was just a tool. You are my home." The profound simplicity of her words struck him harder than any blow he had taken in battle. The frayed thread of their bond, which had snapped back into place during the trial in the catacombs, now settled into a deep, unshakable foundation. There was no more emptiness, no more doubt. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of snow, jasmine, and absolute devotion. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of a dying man, but the slow, deep promise of a king who finally had his queen by his side. "We have a lot of work to do," David whispered against her mouth, pulling back slightly. The land is healing, but it will take time. And the packs, they are united now. But fear is a difficult habit to break. We will show them, Lisa said, turning to look out over the sprawling kingdom. We will rule together, with the strength of the wolf and the memory of the mountain. David stood beside her, his arm wrapped securely around her shoulders. He looked out at Ethelgard, no longer a dying kingdom, but a realm reborn. The future was uncertain, but as he felt the steady, reassuring warmth of Lisa's presence beside him, he knew they were ready to face whatever came next. The Alpha King had his strength back, but more importantly, he had his heart. Lisa's disappearance had nearly broken King David, plunging Ethelgard into despair as a dark curse consumed the land. Her return, wielding the very forbidden magic she had vanished to learn, tested the limits of their love and the trust of a fractured kingdom. Yet, through incredible sacrifice and a bond that transcended both fear and tradition, they purged the blight from their home and sealed their borders against an ancient evil. The Alpha King learned that true strength sometimes lies in surrendering control, while the human queen proved that the purest magic is born of devotion. They stand together now, not just as rulers, but as the unbreakable foundation of a healing world. If you enjoyed this cinematic tale of romance, suspense, and untamed magic, please leave a like, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more dramatic, real-life feeling fiction.